Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Well, I appreciate you coming out in this nasty weather. You ready, Alan?
I am ready.
All right, so here we go. We're going to start. So now we're going to take a look at Hanukkah. Hopefully it'll be something you have never heard before. In Genesis chapter 1, second verse, it says, the earth was tohu and bohu. What does that mean? They usually say it was without form, without shape. The choshech al pnei tahayim, and there was darkness over the abyss. That's what it says. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So in the Medrash, it tells us these four words. But we have to ask ourselves a question. It tells us that creation, the earth was tohu and vohu and darkness. Question is, what relevance is that to us? Whatever it was. What's the difference? We're not interested in what was. The question is, what is it now? So the Medrash tells us that this is referring to these four things. The earth was tohu, vohu, which means without form, without shape, or whatever. It was darkness and the abyss. These four statements are referring to the four exiles that the Jewish people will experience. Egypt is not considered an exile because we weren't in Israel to be exiled. We went down to Egypt. Once we were in the land of Israel, we experienced four exiles. What are they? The Babylonian, Persian Median, the Greek, Syrian Greek, and the Roman. So we are told that Tohu refers to the Babylonian, Bohu to the Persian Median. Babylonia is Nebuchadnezzar, the destruction of the first temple. The Persian Median, this was Achashverosh, Haman. Then we had the third, which is the darkness. This was the Syrian Greeks. That's Antiochus and Hanukkah. And the fourth is Rome, Titus, and the destruction of our second temple and the exile that we are experiencing to this day. Okay? We notice that the third, which refers to the Syrian Greek, is alluded to in the Torah by the word choshech, darkness. Greece represents the darkness. Interesting that the miracle of Hanukkah would be the lights. The lights. Because as we know, a little bit of light disperses much darkness. When it says in the Torah, and God said, "Let there be light," it's very interesting that the word light is the 25th word in the Torah. Why is that significant? Because Hanukkah, which is our festival of lights, falls on what day of the month of Kislev? 25th. 25th. That's why correlation, light and the 25th. Almost as if to suggest that this light that God created on the first day would be the light to dispel the darkness of the Syrian Greeks. And that is because we're not referring just to the light of illumination from the sun, but rather the light that God created was a spiritual light. Spirit. Now, there was an actual light illumination, but it was something of a spiritual nature. This is what we see from the introduction of this verse in Genesis. Okay. With this introduction, now, what was wrong?
I mean, I didn't do a good job.
What was wrong?
It's not in. It's sideways.
It's okay. Pausing for the technical.
Here we go.
It's good.
Yeah, now it's good.
Let's put it over here and get a better view. Whatever view we got, thank you.
Should the reps in
By in there. No, you don't have to worry about me. I'll be. Is everybody muted there? Okay, so this is the introduction that we've had. The verse tells us these four things, Tohu, Vohu, Choshech on the Tehom, refers to the four exiles the Jewish people will experience. The third is that of Assyrian Greeks, which is darkness, and light is the miracle of Hanukkah. Okay, so now let's talk about the history surrounding, thank you. So the history surrounding this miracle of Hanukkah. We all know what's the miracle of Hanukkah. What is the miracle?
8 days.
8 days of the menorah burning beyond this capacity, right? Okay. Let's go a little bit. Let's get a different bit of an insight over here. And if I were to ask you, who is the great villain in Hanukkah? Antiochus, right? Antiochus. Yeah. Tonight we will see that indeed he was a great villain. However, he was not the villain of Hanukkah. All right, so let's go back to the second temple. Second temple, we know the first temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, eventually his Babylonian empire became part of the Persian Median Empire. It was swallowed up. Eventually it fell into the hands of Achashverosh. Achashverosh, we know, marries Queen Esther, and Haman wanted to destroy the Jews. And because of the wisdom of Queen Esther and the sagacity of Mordechai and the divine intervention, Haman is hanged, and Achashverosh grants Esther her wishes. Okay. At that point in time, Klal Yisrael was led by what was known as the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the Great Assembly. Who were these men? Some of the last prophets of Israel. Malachi, Haggai, Mordechai was one of the men of the Great Assembly. We're talking about individuals who were there to establish and maintain the Jewish community, not only for that period of time, but for subsequent generations. When we had the temple, which was built a little bit later, the second temple, one of the great tzaddikim was known as Shimon HaTzadik. He was a Kohen, and he was a Kohen Gadol. He was the high holy priest who went into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, and he served for 40 years. 40 years. During his tenure as Kohen Gadol, there were constant miracles, such as every day in the temple, there is a mitzvah to kindle the 7 flames of the menorah. Menorah in the temple, right? seven branches, 7 flames. The westernmost, they put in the same amount of oil every night, enough to last for 12 hours, the longest night of the year. Miraculously, every single morning, when they would come, they would find that 6 of the flames extinguished, but the western one was still burning. And it continued to burn until they extinguished it so they could rekindle it, because there's a mitzvah to rekindle. This was unbelievable. The oil was burning beyond its capacity. Now, the miracle of Purim took place, they say, around the year 345 BCE. So in the 4th century, before our common era, this is when Purim happened. After Achashverosh and Esther, were king and queen. They had a child that they say was Darius. He succeeded Achashverosh, and the Jews lived with great peace and success. And eventually, Darius was succeeded by Darius II, Darius, whatever, Daryavish. It's called in Hebrew Daryavish. The Jews were loyal to Darius. Now, while this was happening, so this was 345, the miracle of Purim. So it was around what year? 320, around the year 320, 25 years later, 30 years later, permission is given to the Jewish people to rebuild the second temple. Ezra described Nehemiah the prophet. They lead thousands back to Israel. They are protected by the legions of Darius. And they go back and they find the small Jewish community. They revitalize it. They institute many laws that are observed today, such as Friday night Kiddush, a cup of wine, Havdalah. Many of the prayers that we say, our davening, was all established to enable the Jewish community to remain intact. They purified the Jewish community and they built a skeleton temple, meaning just the bare minimum that was required in order to perform the service. While this, yes, sir.
None of the great assembly is both in Babylonia and in Israel.
Yes, they came to Israel, correct. During this particular period, while this was happening now in Israel, we have the golden age of Greece. You've got Plato, you have Aristotle, you have Socrates, you have the great philosophers, you have the great authors, the plays, the books, the knowledge, the philosophy. We also have the Greek-Persian wars. Persia was in control most of the Middle Eastern area, and Greece, which was on the Mediterranean, they came with their great navies and their armies, and they engaged in wars. And indeed, they were very successful driving the Persians out of Egypt, not completely, but they drove them out of some of the cities and in Syria and whatever. As a result of, we had great armies in Greece. And you had the two great Greek nation states that built up incredible armies. And these armies, rather than have one united focal point, these armies were loyal to their states. And they engaged in conflict, and you basically had a civil war. What were these two great states? Athens and Sparta. That is correct. Okay? As a result of these civil wars, Greece became weakened. Now, directly north of Greece is Macedonia. And in Macedonia, we had Philip. Philip of Macedonia, who was a great general, a brilliant general. He had his armies come, and Greece, in this weakened state, was vulnerable, and he comes with his armies and he is able to conquer Greece. Now, rather than subject them to the Macedonian way of life, Philip was extremely brilliant, and rather he came, and yes, he ruled, but he allowed the Greeks to maintain their customs, their traditions, their philosophies, their way of life. He even had his son, Alexander, to be raised in Greece and tutored by Aristotle. Now, they say Alexander was born in 356, and he died in 323, the 4th century. So that means during Alexander, how old was Alexander? He was like 11 years old during the Purim miracle. Purim miracle was taking place in Persia, and this is what was happening in Greece and Macedonia. Now, if you look at the history books, you won't find a word about the Purim miracle. because they never record anything favorable to the Jews. It wasn't of importance to them. And on the contrary, they went out of their way to denigrate and diminish anything of Jewish value. Even, quote, Jewish historians. Many of these Jewish historians were not favorable to Jews. So how do we know the history? What do we know? We know from our sacred scriptures, what's found in the Talmud and what's found that was in some of the Midrashim and things of that nature. So while Alexander is being educated and raised in Greece, and that's why there's been a disagreement for centuries whether Alexander the Great was Greek or Macedonian. They still argue. Philip is assassinated. Alexander, his son, succeeds him at the young age of 20. So we're in the year of 336. He's 20 years old, and he takes over his father's empire. Alexander suffered from epilepsy. He had seizures, and they didn't know what that was. All they knew is that all of a sudden he was overwhelmed by some force that took over his body. They thought he was divine. Alexander was brilliant, one of the great generals. They study in West Point. To this day, they study the strategy of Alexander the Great's armies. He was a brilliant strategist and engaging in war. He takes his armies and he comes to attack the Persians. And he goes to Egypt. And in Egypt, he drives the Persians out. They build a city, or they name a city after him. What's that city called? Okay, very good. Alexandria, fine. Alexander is not satisfied. He then takes his boats and he goes north to Syria, which was the other great stronghold of the Persians. There he attacks them in Persia and he drives them from Persia. They go south to Israel. Alexander comes with his armies into Israel. Now, wherever Alexander went, the Egyptians helped him. The Syrians helped him. They wanted to get rid of these rulers, the Persians. Of course, Alexander, the Greeks, when they came, they did not come to conquer and to enslave. They came to drive out the Persians and form colonies, so to say, like the British Empire, Canada, Australia, colonies, free colonies, part of the empire. They welcomed Alexander the Great. When he came to Israel, the Jews did not help him. Why not? Because we were loyal to Darius. At that point, it was Darius III. Because the Persians, as of this point, were enabling us to live. This was a magnificent time for the Jewish people. We didn't help them. Now, the Jews lived in the area, most of the Jews lived in the area which is called Judea. Yerushalayim, Hebron, a little bit north of that. If you go to the central area, which is called Shomron in Israel, Shomron in English is called Samaria. Why is it called Samaria? Because the Samaritans lived there. Who were the Samaritans? When the Babylonians conquered the land of Israel, so they were concerned, it's a big land to maintain control of. So they took a group of people called Kutites, Kutites. And they took them and they settled them in the central section of the land of Israel, the Shomron, Samaria. Their function was basically to spy and prevent the Jews from gaining power. And if the Jews did appear as though they were gaining some power, some forces, the Samaritans would be the first to inform upon us to the oppressive forces. So a good Samaritan was really a good anti-Semite.
I was gonna ask you.
That's exactly what they were. The Samaritans, realizing that the Jews are not helping Alexander, they were always having friction with the Jews because they're in Israel, and as the Jews were given freedom by Darius and the Persians, the Kutites had to accept to live in Israel with, sure, they couldn't perform idolatry and other things of that nature. And they accepted upon themselves many Jewish traditions. There are even some in the Talmud who say that they converted. Others say, even if they did, it was not appropriate. It was false. It was insincere. It was just a facade. They approach Alexander and they say to Alexander, we will help you. We will do everything possible in your quest of defeating and driving out the Persians. And the Jews won't. All we ask in return is that you and your army destroy the Jewish temple. As of this point, the second temple was now in existence, and Shimon HaTzadik was the Kohen Gadol. So Alexander the Great, this is all from the Talmud and the Tractate Yom. Alexander goes with his armies, and he's riding in front on his horse, and Alexander comes to Jerusalem. And there, when the Jews hear that Alexander is coming, and who knows why he's coming, who knows what he might do, so they come to their great leader, Shimon HaTzadik, and they say, please, we'll go out and greet Alexander. Shimon HaTzadik leads a group on the outskirts of Yerushalayim, and there is Alexander. He stops his horse. He's got his whole army behind him. He stops his horse. He gazes, he looks, he gets off his steed, and he walks over, and he looks into the face of Shimon HaTzadik, and he falls on his knees, and he begins to bow. His people thought he was having one of his moments, but he wasn't. He gets up and he says, who are you? He says, I'm Shimon. Kohen Gadol, come to greet you. And he says, you are the one who has come to me. Before every great battle, I've had a dream. And in that dream, you came to me and you gave me a blessing. And you told me I would be successful. I know every line on your face. I've seen you dozens of times. With that, Alexander became overwhelmed with reverence for Shimon HaTzadik. He goes to Yerushalayim to see the temple. Rather than destroy the temple as the Samaritans requested, he asks what he can do to help as far as providing for the temple. And in the Medrash at the very beginning of Genesis, as a matter of fact, on this verse where it mentions darkness, there the Medrash speaks about the dialogue of Alexander the Great and the sages, in which he presents to them the great questions, the philosophical questions that have troubled mankind for all of our existence, and he presents them to the sages and they resolve them. Alexander is so overwhelmed with awe that he says, I want to construct a monument here to depict our great and eternal friendship. Now, what do you do? Because we're not allowed to build anything on the Temple Mount other than the temple. What can you do? So they tell him, sorry, we don't do that. It's not going to work too well. So they said to him, you know, whatever we build, it could be wood, it could be stone. Whatever we build, it might last a decade, century, few centuries. But then some other conquering army is going to come and they will destroy it. May we suggest that we erect a monument to you that will be eternal. He said, what is that? He said, in Judaism, we name our children for our loved ones, which means that there are names today that you can trace back 1,000 years. We will name our children after you. And then when someone dies, that name will continue with grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And he thought that was the most brilliant and outstanding monument. And that's why to this day, Alexander, Sender is a Jewish name. Okay? So the Jewish wisdom. Alexander dies at the age of 33. I think it was only 13 years that he achieved what he achieved, chasing the Persians almost all the way through Iraq and to Iran. When he died, his empire was divided amongst his three great generals. Antigonus was put in charge of Greece and Macedonia, Seleucus, Syria, and Babylonia, and Ptolemy, Egypt, and Israel. Now, Israel, part of it was by Seleucus, part of it was Ptolemy. Ptolemy eventually wrested the entire Israel from Seleucus. So the Seleucid dynasty and the Ptolemy dynasty had this tension. Ptolemy was interested, as most of the rulers were, tribute and taxes. He had no desire of enslaving and destroying the Jews and Judaism, although if they didn't pay their taxes, that was an option. That was an option. But if you could pay, that's it. Pay and he won't slay. Okay? He wanted tribute and taxes. Now, the taxes were not easy. The Jews did not live in great wealth because whatever they had that was of great value was usually taken by the Ptolemies. They had people there, but they needed people to collect the taxes, and it was very difficult. Tax collection was very, very hard. It wasn't easy. And even if you could go around and get people to tax, who's going to do it? Who's going to be in charge? The Sanhedrin, the great Torah body, which were the leaders of Klal Yisrael, they assigned this task to the Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol was revered. Now this is already after Shimon HaTzadik. Tzaddik had died. The Kohen Gadol at that time, I believe his name was Honio. Honio, he was in charge of collecting the taxes, as the Kohen Gadol did. Honio was now an old man, and he didn't have the energy to do so. He had a nephew. This nephew's name was Yosef ben Tuvia. And Yosef ben Tuvia is the real villain of Hanukkah. Yosef ben Tuvia. Yosef ben Tuvia was a man of little morals and scruples. And he saw a great opportunity in which he went to his uncle and said, "Uncle, let me suggest that I can help. If you will authorize me, I will organize and take care of the tax collections from our people, easing your burden. And this way we won't fall behind in the taxes and we won't give any excuse to the Ptolemies to come and to bring hardship upon us." His uncle made a terrible mistake and he gave him free hand. Yosef ben Tuvia forms a group called the Muhsin. Meches in Hebrew, what does Meches mean? Taxes. Meches. The Muhsin were the tax collectors. Now, they weren't like the IRS, who can annoy a person and aggravate a person. They were far worse. Far worse. Yosef ben Tuvia goes to the Kutites, the Samaritans, and he says to them, I have a plan. Let's gather a large sum of money. And you come with me, will go to Egypt. And there we will go to the Tolmines. And we will say to them that we are going to be in charge of the tax collections. And we are the ones who are going to see that you receive the proper amount. And you won't have to worry. You have a business, everybody worries about, sure, let's get the payments on time. There are people who say, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it for you. And all we ask in return is that you send us some of your military so that we can have some force and strength behind us, and there won't be a resistance, there won't be any defiance. The Samaritans are in on it. He amasses a large tribute. He goes to Tolmai in Egypt, and Tolmai says, in other words, you're going to see that I am going to receive my taxes and tribute at the appropriate time, and you guarantee it? Yes. And as a matter of fact, here's an advance payment. All I ask is some military support. Tolmai says, you got it. Now, why did he do this? Because if the taxes were to be 20% of your income that time, he made sure it would be 30%. So he could take 10% off the top himself. And he came with unbridled military power. He came, and these muhsim now had power, they had control, they had the money, and Yosef ben Tuvia defies the sages. He's not interested in the sages or what they have to say. When the sages came out and they said it's acts of cruelty, they confiscated people's property. They took sometimes their family. Even, you know that even in the 19th century, if somebody owed money and couldn't pay, not only could you confiscate property, you could take their children. Did you know that? You were allowed to take a person's child as payment. And that's what they were doing. He formed a new class. The new class were the Jewish aristocrats. These were the muhsim. And these muhsim did not have respect for the Torah and its value. Oh, they kept kosher because everybody kept kosher. Oh, there was a Shabbos. Everybody had some type of a Shabbos. It was unheard of not to. But it wasn't a real kosher. And it wasn't a real Shabbos. As a matter of fact, they tried to ingratiate themselves amongst the Gentiles. And they ate with them. There are stories, they don't corroborate, but they say he would go back and forth to Egypt, and there he had relations with some of the Egyptian actresses and people who were well known and whatever. This was Yosef ben Tuvia. He created the name Muchas means someone who was a Jew who was oppressing to the worst degree other Jews, a capo in the terms of the holocaust.
His last name is Soros?
Okay. Now, in Syria, Seleucus dies. He is succeeded by Antiochus. Antiochus the Great. And this is now, we're in the 2nd century before the Common Era. Okay? 190, something like that. And Antiochus the Great, with his armies, he also covets wealth. And he comes with his armies and he conquers Israel from the Ptolemies. This is how the, quote, Syrian Greeks, the Greek Seleucus who are in Syria, now come to Israel. And his armies, you know, he promised, you have armies in those days, you promised the soldiers great wealth, that's why they risked their lives. So he places heavy taxes on the Jewish people. he didn't enslave them for the purpose of slavery. It was all about the money. The Jews were able to still live as Jews, but they now had increased taxes from Antiochus. Antiochus did in no way interfere with the muhsim, the tax collectors. As far as they were concerned, we're here to serve whoever our master is. You are a master? Wonderful. Antiochus dies. He is succeeded by his son, Seleucus IV. Seleucus IV, the Kohen Gadol, is sent to speak to Seleucus IV, who they understand is a man of kindness and compassion. And he goes to Syria, in which he wants to speak on behalf of the Jewish community. And there, when he gets to Syria, Seleucus, they discover, has been assassinated, to be succeeded by his brother, Antiochus IV, who calls himself Antiochus Epiphanes. Epiphanes meaning that he is the one who is able to see beyond and to have great vision. And indeed, part of his vision is that he wants to create one culture for the world, the whole world to be of one culture. We're going to take a little bit, we're going to make a chunk, take a little bit from here and a little bit from there, but it's overall going to be directed by the great Greek philosophy. He is approached, Antiochus, by the way, the others referred to him as Antiochus the madman. Called himself Epiphanes, they called him the madman. He recognizes, he is told by the muhsin, that you're always going to face resistance from the Jewish people as long as they have their leadership, the Kohen Gadol. At that point, Antiochus appoints a Jew named Joshua, who was a Kohen, who willingly and gladly changes his name to Jason, the Greek name. And he is appointed to be Kohen Gadol. Now the Jews don't have any means of communicating. Kohen Gadol is in league with Antiochus and the muhsin. Where do they turn? Who do they go to? What can they do? And now the muhsin are not satisfied with living in aristocracy and comfort, but they don't want to be considered as the rebels. And they will always be considered the rebels as long as there are the sages and Judaism to vilify them. And therefore it is the muhsin, not Antiochus, it is the muhsin who come to the conclusion that we must destroy Judaism. And they approach Antiochus and they say that you can have far greater control, bring your dream of Hellenizing the world with your philosophy, you can bring it to fruition. We will help. And they do so. Now they have the seal of approval of Antiochus, who prohibits bris milah, circumcision, Torah study, can't teach Torah. All schools shut down. Imagine that. Not even like COVID, you couldn't even Zoom it. No Torah class. Shabbos, prohibited. Yom Tov, prohibited. Rosh Chodesh, prohibited. In addition, they make altars in every city. And these altars, they bring offerings, swine, pig, hogs. And then they build a gymnasium right next to the Holy Temple. You might say, big deal, what's wrong with gymnasium? It's good, it's healthy, right? A little exercise. The gymnasium of the Greeks was that they had all the men perform without clothing. The Greeks worshiped the body. And this was the immorality that they were trying to spread, immoral behavior, encouraging other aspects of immorality. This is diametrically opposed to the foundation of modesty, which is fundamental in Judaism. They wanted to erect an idol and bring swine as offerings on the altar in the temple. That Jason had a problem with. That he had a problem. You know what they did? Jason is now replaced. And the new Kohen Gadol is someone called Menelas, who's not even a Kohen. He's Jewish, but he wasn't a Kohen. He was chosen by the Muhsin, and now he's the Kohen Gadol. And they bring swine on the altar of God, and they defile the entire temple, and they erect an idol, and they have everyone bowing to these idols. Or you lose your life. At this point, the Jewish community was on the threshold of being destroyed. And at this point, we see acts of remarkable heroism coming from the simplest Jew. We're all familiar with Hannah and her 7 sons, in which they were told each one bow before the ring of the king, in which he had an idol, and one after the other refused. And they were quoting verses that they refused to do so until finally the youngest one came, a child. And the king said, listen, I'll throw something on the floor, bend down and pick it up. And he refused. And he said, you would go so far to pretend that something's on the floor so that the honor of a human flesh and blood king should not be slighted? All the more so that I shall not do anything to slight the honor of the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed is he. And he too was taken out to his death, at which point his mother Hannah said to her son, when you arrive in the world to come, tell Avraham, our ancestor, that you were prepared to offer your one son Yitzchak, and you didn't have to. I offered all 7 of my sons. This is an amazing story. I don't want to elaborate too much, but it is indicative. It's just an example. There were people who had babies, women, they had their children circumcised, and when they were coming for them to put them to death, they jumped off a roof. They died at their own hands. There were people who were studying Torah only to be thrown into prison and to have their lives taken. Jason himself comes to a city, Modi'in. And in Modi'in, there's a Kohen family called the Chashmonoim. Their elderly father is Matisyahu. And there Jason comes, and he brings a pig on the altar. And he has a soldier or 2 with him, and he gathers the Jews, and especially Matisyahu, the Kohen, you right in front. And he says, help me as I offer this pig. And Matisyahu, a peace-loving man, has finally reached his breaking point. Not for himself, but because of the dishonor unto God. And he had a sword that he had hidden. And he says to Jason, indeed, let me slaughter the swine. And as he approaches, he takes out his sword and he stabs Jason. And then he uses the sword to stab the officer who was with him. And he says to the people, as of this point, the people are, whoa, gas, what happened? And he says, we must leave our homes, hide in the caves. You've been in Israel, you know all the mountains, the hills, and everything in caves and caves. Our homes are gone, our possessions are gone, everything is gone. Our lives are gone, but we are not fighting for our lives. We're fighting for our souls. That's what it's about. That's what's about. Haman wanted to destroy our bodies. Antiochus, the Yevonim, they want to destroy our souls. This is Matisyahu, the house of the Chashmonoim. He has his son Shimon, that he appoints to be the leader of his sons and the rebels with him. The general is his other son, Yehuda. They call themselves the Maccabees. Why Maccabi? Because in Hebrew, Maccabi is Mem Prav Beis Yud. It's an abbreviation for, people think Maccabee, the hammer, strength, right? Skill. Maccabee stands for the words me, kamocha, ba'elim Hashem. We say it from Oz Yasha every day in Adav. Who is like you in strength, O God? That's the slogan of the Maccabees. Not physical strength, because they were few. We say in the Al-Hanisim, there were a few hundred against tens of thousands. They weren't skilled. They had no weapons. And even with weapons, they weren't trained. And even if you're trained, could you kill a human being? I have trouble stepping on a roach. I mean, to kill something that's alive. These soldiers, they had no problem taking a life. They enjoyed it. For a Jew to do a thing like that, it's against our nature. 3 years they were battling against the Syrian Greeks throughout Yerushalayim. When they went to war, they would daven. They would fast, and then they went to battle. Which anyone who knows anything about warfare will say, prayer, okay. You need to be strong, you need to be healthy, you need to be fed. You have to have that. They fasted, and yet they had victory after victory until eventually they were able to drive these Syrian Greeks out of Yerushalayim, and they gained hold of the temple. Now the Muhsim remained. The Muhsim used their wealth and they built an incredible citadel and fortress that was impregnable. And they couldn't find ways to get in. And this fortress was so high and it had these small little crevices and they would shoot arrows. And the Muhsim stayed and were fortified. Even after the miracle of Hanukkah, the Muhsim element still remained. We gained access to the temple. We go into the temple and we see, they clean it, they purify it. And they go and they see, they recognize they want to do some of the service, and they find a little jar of oil. And the jar of oil was sealed with the signature of the Kohen Gadol. So they knew that this was pure oil. To make the proper kosher oil for the menorah would take around 7 days. All they had was oil that could burn one night. So we know what happened. Should we do it? Should we not do it? Because, well, we'll do it tonight and then we have to wait a week until we get the rest. Let's do what we can. They did it and it burned. What's Hanukkah about? We all know Hanukkah is about the miracle of the menorah. Here we just had the whole story of the miraculous victories and everything. We thank God for that. That's not what Hanukkah is about. Why is Hanukkah more about the miracle of the menorah, the oil, than it is about the incredible victories? The answer is because we were perplexed. Did we, the Hashmonaim, the Jewish people, make the right decision in lifting up a sword and acting like Esau? We are the descendants of Yaakov, which Yitzchak said, Hakol Kol Yaakov, the voice is the voice of Jacob. Jacob, you know where your strength is? The voice of prayer, the voice of Torah. Esau, your strength is in the sword. And here, we took the sword of Esau, and we were using it to fight our enemies. Did we make the right decision? Did we? We didn't know. Until we had the sign of divine approval. What was the sign? Well, why isn't your victory the sign? Well, maybe God helped us. He didn't want us to be destroyed. The sign was the same miracle that took place for 40 years with Shimon HaTzadik, in which that Weston lamp, that flame, he put the same amount of oil in that lamp like he did the other 6. All 6 were extinguished in the morning, and that one kept burning and burning and burning until they had to eventually extinguish it so they could do the mitzvah of rekindling it. God was saying the same divine miracle, which shows my approval that existed with the great holy Shimon HaTzadik. I am going to perform that for you now. That was the incredible miracle. That's what Hanukkah is about. Hanukkah, Rabbi Avigdor Miller, I took most of this history from the lectures I heard from Rabbi Avigdor Miller, Olav Hashem. Rabbi Avigdor Miller says, these muhsim have been a thorn in our sides to this very day. Jews who will work against Jews. We have people who can be in the Senate, they could be here, they could be there, and they will work against the Jewish people, their own people. And they will attempt to destroy and compromise our faith. Hanukkah is not about liberation. Hanukkah is all about our souls and our faith. That they said it's worth dying for. They can take our bodies. That happens, that happens. Take our souls. Now, we know that on Hanukkah, there's a custom we play with a dreidel. Why? Well, when they hid in the caves, and if they were be found over there or outside in the outskirts, and they were really studying Torah, so quickly when our enemies came, we pretended that we were playing some game, gambling or whatever with a little top, and that was it. Isn't that strange that because they did that, so to this very day, there's a custom that we play with dreidel? And if they were to play with horseshoes, so all the Jews would be out there doing horseshoe, or bocce, or other games, whatever. You know what bocce is? Okay. So, what is it about it? Our sages tell us that the dreidel is something of great, great significance. What are the letters on a dreidel? Nun, Gimel, Hesed, Nes, Godol, Hayashim. A great miracle happened there, right? Yerushalayim, it happened there. Those are the letters. Now, if you turn to page 261, see, you all have a chumash. Let's go to page 261. Parshas Vayigash, which is going to be next week's portion, not this Shabbos, next week. Yaakov is going down to Egypt. He learns Yosef is alive. Yosef is the viceroy. He's going to Egypt. He goes, coming with his whole family. Yosef is like a king. Whatever you need, Yosef can take care of. What does it say in verse 28? Shul, you want to read this for us? Okay. Yaakov sends Yehuda. In Hebrew, it says Goshna. He sends him to Goshen. Hebrew, it's Goshna. Gimel Shin Nun Hey. He sends him to Goshen, so he can make all the arrangements, and this way it'll be prepared when Yaakov comes. Question: why do you have to send Yehuda? Yosef is there. Yosef is the king. He's ruling. Second only to Pharaoh. Whatever Yosef says will be done. Yosef has that. What are you sending Yehuda? And the Torah says he sent him Goshen. Look at the letters of the word Goshen. Gimel, Shin, Nun, Hey. The identical letters that are on the dreidel. Coincidence? Not at all. What was special about Goshen? It's given to Avraham. It was given to Sarah. When there was a famine and he went down to Egypt, and Paro saw Sarah, how beautiful she was, he took her to be his princess. And Paro was afflicted with all types of illnesses, plagues, and she tells him that she is married, Abraham is her husband or whatever, and he gives back, and he gives her many gifts. One of the gifts he gave her was a district in Egypt called Goshen. Goshen. When the Jews went down to Egypt, Yosef prepared for them to live in Goshen. Know why? It was really ours. It belonged to our matriarch, Sarah. Now, when Yitzchak marries Rivka, it says that he marries her, he brings her to his mother's tent, and he loves Rivka. First of all, he marries her, then he loves her. Well, that's not a bad thing. It's good to be in love with your wife. It's a nice thing. Nothing wrong with that. Okay. But why is the Torah even telling us this? Well, we need to know this. Well, why is that important? Second of all, he brings her to his mother's tent. Why does he bring her to his mother's tent? Doesn't he have his own? Why does he go to his mother's tent? And where's Avraham? Avraham had a separate tent from Sarah. So Rashi tells us that he marries her and he brought her to his tent. And he sensed the presence of his mother there, as if it was his mother's tent. How? There were 3 constant miracles in the tent of Sarah. 1, she would make bread Shabbos and made fresh the whole week. 2, there was a cloud representing a divine presence hovering above her tent, even though the rest of the day was perfectly sunny. 3, when she would light her Shabbos candles, the flame would not extinguish, didn't go out. Didn't go out. She put on oil. If she lit this amount of oil on a Tuesday, it would burn out after 4 or 5 hours and it's gone. Shabbos, it was there. The Shabbos lights of Sarah burned beyond their capacity. Shimon HaTzadik burned beyond the capacity. Chanukah, the miracle, burned beyond its capacity. The numerical value, Shin is 300, Nun is 50, 350, He is 5, 355, Gimel is 3, 358. Goshna, or the letters on the dreidel, equal 358, because this represents the spiritual light, this light that we're talking about, that is dispersing the darkness of the Yevonim, the Muhsim, Antiochus, is this spiritual light that God created on day 1. This is the spiritual light that the righteous Sarah was able to reveal, that enabled her flames to burn for an entire week. That is the same, she uncovered it, she revealed it. And once it's revealed, it was there for the great righteous ones to utilize, Shimon HaTzadik and the Chashmonoim with the menorah. And this great light, 358, is the antidote to something else, which is 358. Shin, Nun, Ches, 358. What does that spell? Nochash. What's a Nochash? Serpent. The serpent, which is the symbol of evil, the evil inclination, is negated and obliterated by the remarkable light that was revealed by Sarah, that was then taken and utilized by the great righteous, found in our menorahs. In addition, the word Mashiach, Shin is 300, Mem is 40, 340, Yud is 10, 350, Ches is 8, 358. Mashiach, 358. Though this light will not be limited to just the menorah in the home of a Jew, or by Sarah, or by Shimon HaTzadik, this light, the spiritual light of creation, is going to be spread and illuminate the entire world. And the letters of Mashiach, if you just reverse them, you could take Yud, Shin, Mem, Ches, which spells Yismach, rejoice. We will rejoice. The world will rejoice. When? Messianic era. Why? Because the spiritual light of God that was revealed and brought to this world, discovered by Sarah, planted in Goshen, seized by the great righteous, and found within our menorahs on Hanukkah, And one last thing, there is a verse in which we say Hashem Melech, God is king. Hashem Molech, God has always been king. Hashem Yimloch, God will be king to all mankind. Now the name Hashem, Yud, the Hey, the Vav and Hey is 26. So we have Hashem's name 3 times. How much is 3 times 26? 78. Excellent. Then you have Melech and Molech and Yimloch. We'll take away the test. So what is Melech? 70, 90. How much is 3 times 90? 270 and 78? 348. And then you have the Yud of Yimloch, which is 358. 358. What will happen when the great light is revealed to the entire world? We are going to see joy. What is that joy? All of mankind will know God is king. He's in control. God has always been king. We thought we're in control. Joke's on us. And Hashem Yimloch, God will always be king, no matter what befalls us, no matter what transpires. And where do we find this light, this spiritual light? The light of the menorah, the light of Sarah, the light of Shimon HaTzadik, the light of Mashiach, in our menorahs. That's what Hanukkah is all about. I wish you all a wonderful Hanukkah. How do I do this? Oh.